Hey guys, so in today's video we're going to talk about driver, and it's the mistake that every golfer is making, even a scratch golfer. I'm going to show you exactly what he was doing in today's video, and you guys are most likely doing the same thing. Let's get stuck into it. The difficulty with driving that we all face is that this golf ball is now sitting up on a T-peg, so our natural inclination is we need to really feel like we've got to try and hit up on the golf ball to make a significant difference, and I think this is a big problem. You see, not only for the scratch golfer that I recently played golf with, but for a lot of people that I've worked with over my time, they all have the same issue. What I tend to see with most golfers with the driver is that they tend to move off the golf ball, and I can understand that because, like, you know, you're sort of taught move the ball position forward, focus on the back of the golf ball, and sort of turn behind the ball. But can you see what I'm sort of demonstrating here with this type of rotation? See the way as I'm allowing my head to move too much off towards my right side, the way that this is encouraging me to move closer towards the golf ball. Now, the problem with this, you see, is as I now start my downswing, and what we can also see with my scratch golfer, is if you are moving closer to the golf ball, you are effectively stuck, and you're just not going to be able to perform very well with the driver. You see, the driver wants to be swung on a shallower plane. That basically means if I drew a line through the heel and through my elbow line here, I need to take the club back through that line, up, back down and through along that line. And the only way I can keep that swing plane shallow, which basically means hands lower, not hands higher, is learning how to rotate correctly. Any sort of movement this way is just going to lend itself to a steepness with the driver, which therefore is just going to mean you're stuck. The question would be, what should we work on? What we worked on in the lesson is actually pretty simple. We worked on this idea of just keeping the head still, and me just kind of placing my sort of forefinger on the side of Chris's head there, it just sort of encouraged him to find a way to trigger a rotation without moving his head, and therefore he kind of started to move very differently. Now his sort of feedback was, different, and the immediate reaction was more tilted, and that's true. You see, if I sort of stand on from this side on perspective here, and this time what we're going to do is going to draw a line through, again, the heel and through my elbow, but also going to draw a line on the back of my hips. You see, if I go back to allowing my head to move, can you see the way I'm moving closer to the ball? Now the problem is from here, as I now start my downswing, as I just said, I'm going to be closer towards the golf ball. Therefore, it's going to be impossible to keep that club moving through on plane. Now, what we did with Chris is by working on the head staying still, can you see the way that it gives me the ability to create hip depth? See the way my right hip is now moving back. Now, this is obviously going to feel very different and equally quite steep. And what I mean by this is if I get set up and I try and rotate keeping my head stiller, most golfers will think, yeah, but if I do that, I'm going to come down too steep. Well, not the case. We'll come back to that in a moment. So the benefit of obviously moving correctly, so the way my right hip now has gone back, so that means I can rotate and bring that club through whilst maintaining that swing plane. So if we can all agree on the idea that there's a very high likelihood that you're either doing one of two things. You're either setting up too tilted, which is then encouraging you to move off the ball, or you're equally moving your head too much in the backswing position, which is making you sort of stand up and therefore hit the golf ball where you're getting closer to it. The question that we have to answer, I would say, is, well, how do we rotate keeping our head still and then avoid coming down too steep? Answer is sequence. Okay, so we need to find a way to get that club to strike up on the golf ball. And the problem we have is if we've got the backswing out of position, your immediate reaction is going to be to pull down on the club. But you'll sort of get away with this, you know, this sort of motion, and you'll still hit up on the golf ball. All of a sudden, if you keep your head much stiller and then you sort of pull down on the club, now it's going to be way too steep. So what you need to then start practicing is making sure that you are swinging back and you are turning first. You see, what happens if I use my right hand and push my left arm up in the air here, can you see the way as I turn my chest as opposed to pulling down just with the club? See, my left shoulder goes up and behind me, and as my left shoulder goes up and behind me, the way that this now enables the club to move like I'm showing you here, which is where if my shoulder goes up and behind me, the club will drop down, which helps me hit up on the ball. If I sort of move this way where I pull down on the club, see the club's more in front of me, which is going to massively get us too steep. So what I did in the lesson with Chris was relatively straightforward. I basically said, look, we need to work on keeping our head still, and then what that started to do very naturally, and he did really well with his irons, is that gave him this capability to rotate. So he started to, with his irons, keep that head a lot stiller and then rotate through the golf ball. He's got to do exactly the same thing with the driver. so do you guys as well. This is by no doubt the reason why you struggle with driver, is because you are struggling with your backswing, which is then making you struggle with your downswing sequence. So to get started with, make sure in that backswing, yep, the setter position, move the ball left of center. You'll have a bit of tilt because of that, but then from there you want to keep your head nice and still, and then make sure you're thinking about rotation first. It's going to make a massive difference, I promise you. I'll see you guys again really soon.